Hey VC Health students, my name's Andy. I'm a VC HHD teacher. In this short video, we're going to look at relationships between the dimensions of health and well-being. As you can see on this slide here, this is relevant to Unit 3 HHD students, but if you are studying Unit 1, you also cover the dimensions of health and well-being. So although this isn't specifically included in the course curriculum, it wouldn't hurt you to also watch this video here, as you can practice building this skill as well. As you can see, the Health Resources Hub also has social media, so you can follow us on Instagram or TikTok and like and follow the Health Resources Hub Facebook page. This will give you opportunities and alerts to new videos and other HHD relevant opportunities that will be coming out this year. You can also send us an email at info@thehrh.net.au. So what part of the course does this relate to? So if you're studying Unit 3, 4, you can see there that in Unit 3, one of the key skills is to describe the relationship between dimensions of health and well-being. So in the key knowledge, you'll be covering all of the different dimensions of health and well-being, but this is the key skill. Now, we have talked about in previous videos the importance of making sure that you're taking a look not only at the key knowledge points, but also the key skills, because the key skills relate to how you are putting the key knowledge from the HHD course into action. And often questions that are asked in assessments relate to not only the key knowledge, but definitely the key skills. So this is why this is an important video to watch and an important key skill to master. So then the question there is, well, how do you demonstrate a relationship or relationships between dimensions of health and well-being? And so what we're going to look at here is the way that marks are often linked for these types of questions is that when you are demonstrating a relationship or relationships between dimensions of health and well-being, marks are often allocated to either referencing something from a case study and linking that to a dimension of health and well-being, or for the way in which you link or demonstrate the relationships between the dimensions of health and well-being. So it's really important to take the context of the question into consideration and how many marks are allocated when thinking about how to approach a question like this. And so we'll have a look at that now. So the way the question is phrased in the mark allocation will help to guide your answer. So if you're thinking about your response, you can think about it as something that starts at one point and builds from there. So you're showing how there are sort of connections between the dimensions, and that often starts at the first example that you're giving, whether or not that is related to a case study or you're coming up with your own example. And so when you are thinking about how you're connecting, okay, those different dimensions, you're thinking about the different examples that are relevant to the different dimensions. So, for example, for the physical dimension of health and well-being, you might be talking about or linking to fitness levels to then an example that's relevant to, say, the mental dimension of health and well-being, which could be something like self-esteem or confidence. So it's really about linking together those different examples of the dimensions of health and well-being. And so you can see there from that last point and the image provided that if you are referencing one dimension twice in an answer, so for example, you might be going from an example of the social dimension of health and well-being to the mental back to the social, then you should make sure that you're using two different examples of, say, the social dimension of health and well-being, not the same example twice. So in this example here, if you were starting with an example that was relevant to sort of developing and maintaining relationships and then linking that to an example of the mental dimension of health and well-being, when you go back to the social dimension again, if that's what you're doing as part of your answer, you need to make sure that you're not linking back to relationships again, because you started with that example of the social dimension of health and well-being. So you could be linking back to something different, like developing communication skills or something like that. So that's just something to be mindful of. Now, with this diagram here, not necessarily will your responses always look like this, where you're going from, say, one dimension at the beginning to a different dimension and back to the same one. As I mentioned before, you need to look at the way the question is phrased and the mark allocation. And so we'll look at a couple of sample questions that should help to guide how you can think about the way that you should structure your answer if there is a question about a relationship or relationships between the dimensions. So let's have a look at this sample question 1 and a sample answer. So this is from a past HHD exam where they gave you a bit of a scenario here about Lucy, who was 17 years old, lived with her parents and had two younger brothers and a grandmother. She also, had a large extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins who get together regularly, and she trains with a netball team twice a week and plays in competitions every Saturday. So then you can see the question here was asking you to use an example from the information above to describe the relationship. So it's important to note that that's not plural, just the relationship between Lucy's social health and well-being and her spiritual health and well-being. It was worth 2 marks. So it's really asking you to take something from, the scenario, link it to social, okay, dimension of health and well-being, and then link that to spiritual. So you're really just doing one sort of connection. So the relationship between social and spiritual. We'll look at another sample question in a moment that looks at something slightly different to this. But then you can see a sample answer there. So it mentions by training with a netball team, Lucy's developing and maintaining relationships with friends and therefore promoting her social health and well-being. And so then when you start the second sentence, what I encourage my students to do is then show how, okay, this next sentence here is linking your example from the first sentence to something, okay, from a different dimension of health and well-being. So often by starting the second sentence with sort of rephrasing the example from the first, it can really show that connection. So you can see here it mentions these positives and supportive relationships. So demonstrating that that first sentence was about relationships will help give her a sense of connection and belonging to her team, positively promoting her spiritual health and well-being. So that sense of connection and belonging is part of the spiritual dimension of health and well-being. So you're showing there that link between the relationships and that sense of connection and belonging. So showing the relationship between that social and spiritual health and well-being, which is what the question was asking. Okay. So then this is a different, okay, sample question. So this one here is asking you to describe relationships, okay? So this is plural between two dimensions of health and well-being. So because it says relationships there, okay, and there isn't necessarily a case study or a scenario that this is based on, I would be thinking that you have to do what was evident in that image we were looking at earlier and say go from social to mental back to social. So as I mentioned earlier, often the marks are allocated either from a scenario linking to a dimension or for links between the dimensions. So for this one here, because it's saying relationships between two dimensions, you should think about the 2 marks being allocated for those sort of 2 links between the dimensions. So you can see here, I've given you a sample answer. So let's have a look at that. So I've just started by saying practicing a sports skill at home may contribute to building high levels of confidence and self-esteem. So that's a link to the mental dimension of health and well-being. So I put that in brackets. Okay, so high levels of confidence and self-esteem regarding this skill. So then once again, I've started the next sentence, okay, with a link from that example. So this confidence and self-esteem, the skill may contribute to joining an associated sports team where high levels of fitness can be developed. And fitness is a link to the physical dimension of health and well-being. And then once again, for the start of the last sentence, I've started again with that example of the physical dimension of health and well-being by talking about high levels of fitness may contribute to a greater participation in exercise, which can act as an outlet for stress and anxiety. And so you can see there, stress and anxiety is a different link to the mental dimension of health and well-being compared to the one that I used in the first sentence, which was about confidence and self-esteem, and therefore helping to keep these low. So you can see here for 2 marks, the links would be, the marks would be allocated for those links. So from mental to physical, and then link from physical back to mental. So there's different ways that this kind of, I think, skill could be presented in assessments. And so this is just something to be mindful of when you see questions that are asking about relationship or relationships when it comes to the dimensions of health and well-being. Okay, hopefully you found that video useful. I was lucky to work with ACE to develop this new resource for the 2025 HH study design. And so it's packed with questions to help you practice, put into action the key knowledge and the key skills for Unit 3 and 4 this year. So it's got over 500 marks worth of questions, including a full chapter on extended response questions. So if you'd like to order a copy of this, you can head to book.acevce.com to place an order. And also head to our website, thehrh.net.au, where there's lots of opportunities for HHD students and teachers. And also you can see down the bottom there, if you'd like to sign up to our free student newsletter to get more tips and advice and free resources. Once again, you can head to our website and there's a form there that you can fill in to sign up and get a copy of the student newsletter. Thanks so much.